So I'll just talk a little bit more about the harvest cycle. During these last 2,000 years, the wheat has been brought in. These are made up of Jews and Gentiles, the wheat being the souls of people that are turning to the Lord. Some of these Gentiles are actually from the 10 lost tribes of the house of Israel. That's a part of prophecy that's being fulfilled. So there are people that are actually descendants of Israel that don't know it. That's part of what's going on. Others are from the nations. And we read in Joel about God pouring out His Spirit upon Israel, but also upon the maidservants. So this was fulfilled in Acts chapter 2, partly. Now, one of the missions of the Messiah is related to us here in Isaiah 49:6. And he said, "It is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob." So that's one of the missions of the Messiah, is to raise up the tribes of Jacob. Now, how is he doing that? Because when Yeshua came, he offered the kingdom and the Jews rejected it. So how is he raising up the tribes of Jacob? And to restore the preserved of Israel. That's a very interesting term. And I'll also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation. That's Yeshua, salvation. Yeshua means he will save. Jesus means he will save, or at least the word Yeshua means he will save his people from their sins. Be my salvation unto the end of the earth. There's Australia, and New Zealand and Antarctica. So the Lord's purpose through the gospel, through Yeshua, is very broad. It's very specific too. Yes, it's about Jacob. It's about Israel. It's also about the Gentiles that are called by his name. Now, it's this very interesting because in the Hebrew, the word preserved of Israel, there's a bit of wordplay going on. Because it just happens to be that word notzri, preserved, I'll write it on here. It's a nun. You guys may not know the Hebrew, but I'll just write it here, notzri. Just happens to be that word notzri is the same word for Christian in Hebrew. So it says to restore the Christians of Israel. Just sort of throw that in there because part of his purpose is gathering in Israel, and we know that spiritually we are Israel, whether we're physically from Israel or not. But also, the purpose of the Messiah is to bring in the tribes of Jacob, not just the Jews, but the house of Israel. If you read 1 Kings chapter 12, Israel split into two halves. The northern 10 tribes said to the house of David, "We don't want you anymore. You're taxing us too much. We're sick of your building projects. You're hard-hearted. We're going to go our own way." And God said, "This is from the Lord." But unfortunately, what wasn't of the Lord is they introduced idolatry immediately into their kingdom. Because the king, Jeroboam, was afraid that the Israelites would come into Jerusalem and then join back with the house of Judah. And so he put a golden calf in Bethel and Dan. He says, "These are your gods. Worship these." And then he changed the feasts. And he got rid of the Levites, and he raised up priests from the lowest of the people. And it was to the northern tribes that Elijah was sent. And that's where Jezebel did her evil. So eventually it got to the point where God had to divorce them. And we spoke about that last week. So part of the gospel is that God is actually gathering in the lost tribes of the house of Israel and the Jews, which are the house of Judah, and the rest of the Gentiles. So, and he's not only just gathering them in, but he's building something very high. Because the church of the firstborn is actually something that is very high. It says in Hebrews 12, "Ye are come to the heavenly Jerusalem, to Mount Zion, to an innumerable company of angels, to the church of the firstborn. So, as I say to people, we're not Zionists, like there's Christian Zionists who support Israel. We're not Zionists, we are Zion spiritually. That's where we've come into. That's where we're rooted, if you like. That's where we're connection through the Messiah. So when God gave Moses the building plans for the tabernacle, we are that tabernacle spiritually. So I just think that God's grace is amazing, and that fills my heart with wonder. And I want to know my Father in heaven. His plan is so deep and so high and so broad. And for people to turn away from the gospel, it's unbelievable, this free gift that God has given. So, now for the sake of time, I'm going to shoot through this very quickly, because this could be all very academic. But essentially there's a connection between the 7 days of creation, the 7 feasts, and the 7 churches. Any time when you have a group of things, it's the same number in Scripture, there's a connection. So the church is very much related to the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick, the light of the world, Yeshua. And it's very much related to the central feast, Pentecost. The central stem of the menorah, by the way, in Hebrew is called the Shemesh, which means the sun, as in S-U-N. We know that Yeshua is likened to the sun, a bridegroom, and that is in a race. I can't remember the scripture exactly. It's a quote from the Old Testament, but certainly Yeshua is the light of the world. And that central stem is called the sun, S-U-N. And we see in the book of Revelation Yeshua at the centre of the candlesticks. At the centre. So he's at the centre of all of it. Now on the 4th day, the sun, moon and stars were created. And on the 4th feast, we have Pentecost, gathering in the wheat. And both of those were the substance of the dream that Joseph had. The sun, moon and stars, and the stalks of grain. So Joseph's dream is all about this Pentecostal period in a sense. And later on, through the church age, what Joseph dreamed is actually being fulfilled, because we are being brought into that church of the firstborn. Joseph was the first, he got the right of the firstborn. That's why he had those dreams, because Reuben was a naughty boy. And you have to read the book of Genesis to get into that. But for the sake of time, I'm going to push this a little bit quicker. One of the purposes of the Messiah, in Matthew 15:24, but he answered and said, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, when I read it, I go the Jews. But once I've done some study, I go, no, the Jews are the house of Judah. The house of Israel, the 10 tribes, they were scattered. They were collectively known as the house of Israel. So when he says lost sheep, he's not just meaning lost spirit sheep, they're lost physically. So that's one of the purposes of the gospel, has been bringing those in. So that's not controversial, it's just that they're scattered amongst people. So some of the people that get saved are actually from the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and others are Gentiles that are not from the house of Israel, and they're all one in Messiah, and there's no second-class citizens or anything. So it's not about that. But the rabbis say one of the purposes of the Messiah is to bring back the lost tribes. He's actually been doing it. The rabbis that don't even know. I'm not kosher as far as they're concerned, because I follow Yeshua, and that's okay, because you know what? I'd rather be with him that's rejected than to enjoy the praises of men. So who are the lost sheep of the house of Israel? That's for another study. In Matthew 16:18 we read, And I say unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So that's another purpose. So one purpose is to gather in the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but another purpose of the Messiah is to build this thing called the church, or the congregation of the Messiah, the congregation of Israel. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. By the way, the Catholics say that Peter was the first pope. Well, he's not the first pope. He's actually, the rock is that Peter said that Yeshua is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And it's upon that rock, on who Yeshua is, that he'll build his church. So people that deny who Yeshua is, that's the spirit of Antichrist. It's the spirit of the world. So we need to at all times lift up who Yeshua is. He's the centre of prophecy. He's the centre of everything. This is my Son with whom I am well pleased. Hear him. So, a question. Whereabouts is the church in the Torah? Yeshua was a Jew. He followed the Torah. Of course, he's the Son of God, but according to the flesh. He talks about this thing called the church. Well, the church is an English word. The Greek word is ecclesia. And the Hebrew would be kahal or adat, congregation. And we read in the Torah that there was a congregation in the wilderness. And it was called an evil congregation, the congregation of Israel. The congregation of Israel was not all of the Israelites in the wilderness. It was a group. It was like your senators. You know, senators are Americans, but not all Americans are senators. So that's what the congregation in the wilderness was. And so when Yeshua says, I'm going to build my congregation, he's building something that's part of Israel spiritually, but is higher. And that's what we've been brought into. We've been brought into something that's high. It's spiritually high. We've got a lofty calling. And Paul prayed that the eyes of our understanding would be enlightened into the depths and the heights of what we've been brought into. You know, and that's not just a head thing, that's a heart thing. That it would enter into our hearts what we've been brought into, and that we'd learn to walk with our daddy. So, I'm not going to labour the point here, but essentially the church, the congregation of Israel, that's what we've been brought into. It's separate from Israel, but it's actually connected. We're kind of just like Eve was from Adam, but was her own being. So the church of the firstborn has got this connection to Israel, but it's got a sense of height. He who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than John the Baptist, for instance, who was the greatest of the prophets. So I just want to kind of put the relationship of the church to Israel. If Israel is gathered around the tabernacle, we are that tabernacle spiritually.